Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds and under 30 decent cards still available. Today I'm your host, Phil, and with me as always is my co-host, Davy. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
So, we're coming at you. We're thinking about building new decks, and we're thinking about building new decks because, as some context for this episode, we just got our second teaser about Harrowdeep and the new realm that we are going to be exploring in the seas of Ulgu, and got a pretty cool story background for the Harrowdeep today.
Yeah.
Which,
what did you think of this?
I thought it was kind of nice, mostly because Ulgu, I think, is probably the least explored realm.
For sure.
For those of you who double dip and like to go and listen to the story phase, you probably haven't heard much about Ulgu because there's not really a whole lot going on there in our stories. We hear a lot about the space between Ulgu and Hysh.
Mm-hmm. Specifically where Shadespire happens to be floating around.
Yeah, it's where Shadespire's floating around. It's where Slaanesh is chained up. Yep. But we don't really hear a whole lot about Ulgu itself. And so I always appreciate getting the maps of the realms. And so actually seeing like, hey, here's some more like grounding places in Ulgu that can actually like anchor the setting. I think it's pretty cool. And then, of course, just learning a little bit more about like sort of get the setup for how it is that we ended up there for Underworld. It's always cool. Yeah. What do you think?
I thought it was neat. I thought there was some cool links. So what little we know of Ulgu, there's been some references, particularly in I would say Josh Reynolds' book, in that space in between. It's like these references to these sort of elf gods that like perhaps older than the chaos gods, or there's things out there, and then Ulgu kind of references those as well, like these kind of entities, almost like a sort of a Lovecraft pantheon or something that is ancient and unknowable or whatever. And I think it feels like it leans into that even more with these sort of cyclopean underwater. Like those are themes that you would find in that genre of fiction. And I like it a lot. I think we mentioned, I was like, I thought it was fun to explore more. Like I'm more excited for this setting than I was for Beastgrave. And not that I didn't enjoy Beastgrave, but for somebody who enjoys the background and the fiction, it felt like we already knew a fair amount about Gur when we went in there.
Yeah, definitely.
Shadespire was it was new to us, like the idea of a city ripped from Shyish. I mean, I don't know if you had to like say it was part of a realm, you might say it was from Shyish because that's where it was torn from. But so this feels like a fun new thing in the same way that the original Shadespire was a new idea, like it was informing some small part of the greater story of Age of Sigmar. In that same way, it feels like this Harrowdeep is doing the same thing.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that we get some more expansion on that when we actually see the box drop. But
totally,
folks will have to stay tuned to hear about that.
Yep.
But so knowing that we have a new season coming soon, new cards, new factions, new mechanics, even from some of the stuff that we've seen, we thought it would be interesting to talk about what is deck building going to look like post-rotation. So that's our main topic for today. We're going to sort of talk through like what is deck building looking like post-rotation? What are factions looking to do? Where do certain strategies stack up? And just generally like where are you looking to go with your cards? But before we get into our main topic, as always, we've got our standing pieces here, and we got some community shout outs. Davey, who would you like to shout out this time?
So I've got two. One is actually for an episode that I've not heard yet. This is Battle for Salvation, Warhammer Underworlds podcast. They released their Idoneth ep, and it's with Zach Newcomb. Zach is an awesome player. He is one of the nicest guys I've met. I got to see him. I got to meet him in person at the American Team Championships approximately 4,000 years ago, by my estimations. It feels
Sounds
that way.
about right.
He has been all in on Chosen Axis for a long time, but he went with Idoneth and did very well in the recent online clash that happened. And so I'm looking forward to hearing his take. I shout it out because occasionally Max and I like to talk a little music. He's much more knowledgeable on the subject than I am. Like, has actual music knowledge. I'm pure amateur hour here, but he sent me like a advance edit of just the song he puts at the beginning, and it is straight fire. So I know for a fact I've said this more than once. If the only thing you tune in for is for the first 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes to hear the song that he's recorded, then it's worth the download. You should do it. But I'm looking forward to listening to the rest because Zach's the heat, and you get to get in the mood with some sweet tunes. The other thing I wanted to shout out, and I just saw this today, so I tried to contact this. There's somebody on Facebook posted one of the groups, somebody by the name of Pang Liang, I think, posted up some artwork of Harrowdeep, and they used like a Mike Mignola style art. That would be the creator of Hellboy and that sort of whole thing. It's not like a dead ringer for that, but it was really, really cool art. Got pictures, sort of drawn up members of each warband of the season as a whole, kind of like what things we know, like an interpretation of that. I just thought it was super cool. Got me pumped. I wanted to find a way to share it. So I tried to get in touch with this person. It's only been a few hours and I haven't heard back about how best to share it. So barring anything better than that, I will try to link to the spot on Facebook where I found it. But I really enjoyed these, and I think other people would too. And I'd like to get more eyes on this. So, Phil, anything you got for the community?
Yeah. So obviously, well, not obviously, but still have not had a whole lot of time for hobbying, and haven't had a whole lot of time to just read articles. I've seen a ton of stuff being dropped, and it all looks awesome, but I just, I haven't taken the time. Been busy with work, but we did get some really cool shout outs and feedback about our live deck building episode, which we were a little unsure of how that was going to go over. And we were really happy to get that feedback and hear that people enjoyed it. So
Yeah.
I know I enjoyed recording it, and I'm glad that people enjoyed listening to it. And I hope that we get to do another one of those in the future.
Yeah, I think you and I, it was the most fun we'd had recording an episode in quite a while, particularly when it's just, it's not that we enjoy doing them in general, but I think we got to the end of that and we were just real positive about like having had a really good time doing it. So yeah, I expect to see more. May or may not bring a guest in. We had some cool suggestions on different directions to go with it. So we'll do that. And we do have some ideas on some other sort of experimental episode types. So when time permits and when schedule is conducive, we may roll some of those out and try some of those out. They may or may not be successful, but it like we took a risk on that one and it kind of paid off, and that was cool. So we just big ups very much. I mean, we appreciate any kind of feedback people can give us.
Yeah, always.
And it was cool to hear that was appreciated.
Definitely. All right, that's community shout outs. So what the heck's been going on with you?
Well, I can tell you what should have been going on with me. It should have been working on my hobby room. It is kind of a disaster right now. I've got that kind of hobby sprawl where like,
oh, I know the feeling.
The projects of like, I work on this project and kind of set that to the side before it's completed. And like, when I'm real focused, I'll have just the paints I need or kind of out. But I've had so many that like now every paint is out,
Yep.
except for a few. So some of that needs to happen, but I've been working on the Wurmspat. So I had a start on them before, and kind of working on them a little bit more. I'm going for kind of a bloated, drowned look, which I've seen some folks. I don't know why. I think the only way I know how to innovate is to try to do different skin tones.
Hey, it's a good idea.
Yeah,
really pushes things there.
Yeah. So that's me. What about you?
Yeah. Well, other than reading about Harrowdeep, I haven't done much of anything other than deck building for Underworlds.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's not great. I also need to clean up my hobby room. I was recently just organizing cards again because with rotation coming, and so for whatever reason, I ended up getting new binders for like all the seasons after season 1. So the only binder that didn't match was my season 1 binder, and so now
that's
I've
just terrible.
Wanted to get everything set up again, but so now I have to like move all my season 1 stuff into this new binder, and I don't know. I've got like warbands are all over the place, and my hobby space is a mess. But I've started working on it a little bit, so that's something.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, so hoping to get out on Thursday, roll some more dice, get that going again. And then hopefully bear down and actually do some hobbying again for the first time in like a month.
Sounds awesome. I should say, like, if we're including that in hobby, I did have a big sesh kind of associated with this where I broke down some of my, like, basically all my existing decks, and then filed away the old stuff. But the only caveats being is that some of those cards that make it into a lot of decks, like Duel of Wits. So there's a Shadespire. So I'll have like that way I don't have to swap between. So there's a couple gaps in those old binders, but
yep.
It was satisfying. Copies. Yeah, it's something I've been doing more and more. I used to like build, and then like have that cast offs would just be a growing pile in the corner, and all of a sudden I'd be like, I can't find any of the cards I need. I'm like, oh no, they're in that like 300 card pile over there, like unorganized. So now as I tear a deck down, I put it away, and it warms my soul to have that organization.
Making Aaron proud.
I know, it's all I want in life. He doesn't listen to this. I don't need to kiss his butt. So
yeah. Who needs to appease our overlord? Anyway, so yeah, I think we can probably move on to talking about our main topic now.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So we are talking building decks post-rotation before the rotation actually happens.
Yep.
But why, though, you might be saying?
Especially if you're reading our notes.
Yeah. If you're reading our notes, you would definitely ask that question. But many of you out there might even be thinking the same thing. And we will say, or at least I will say, that I think that this is a good palate cleanse. It's a good mindset shift to just, if you believe that this is a competitive game and you want to be in a competitive situation, you kind of have to prep yourself for what the landscape's going to look like. And I think the only way you can really do that is to really strip everything down and say, okay, what are my new tools? What have I lost? Where can I go from here?
Yeah.
And so I built a couple decks. Davy built a couple decks, and I think we've come to some conclusions, and we've definitely seen there's a lot of stuff that we kind of have been relying on that is not going to be around after rotation.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple things that I feel like prompted this. One, Matt, who's on our last episode, he posted up a Blade Coven deck, and I have a soft spot for them because I have a soft spot for underdogs.
Oh yeah.
And I just, I don't know, like I not a general not a fan of elf warbands from a background perspective, but I just kind of like how they have the potential to play. I feel like there's something to unlock there. And he posted a deck. I was like, that's interesting. I'd like to try that out. And I didn't even realize it, but somebody else pointed out like, hey, this looks like it's rotation proof. And he's like, yep, that's what I do at this time. And I'm like, oh, right. And so put a lot more thought into it. And there was further conversation. I talked about trying to work on Wurmspat and thinking felt really hard. And there was a user on one of the Discords that described it as irrational. And so that got us thinking of like, well, if somebody thinks of it as irrational, we don't think of it that way. So let's talk about the reasoning for it. That's kind of how we went. And it's like you said, it's prepping. One thing that I enjoy about it is that it's forward looking, right? So right now, even our local is kind of in this lull. We're waiting on Harrowdeep to drop. Like that's the big thing. And this gives you a way to kind of look forward at it. And sure, like there are going to be universal cards that will drop into the pool. And if it's in the style of Dire Chasm, which we have every reason to expect it to be now that Essentials are out, the core set should drop with more universals than seasons 1, 2, and 3, because we're not going to have the hold 1 through 5. We're not going to have the great strength, fortitude, and speed. We'll have like all the universals in that box set, with the possible exception of whatever is Grand Alliance specific. More to be learned about that. But there's more to play with out of the gate. So why would you start building decks before you know everything that you could actually play with? And it's because you get a sense for, like you said, what's missing. Like what did I lose? What gaps remain to be filled? And so right now, it's a thing where like it's almost like build it now. Because during a regular season, when a new expansion comes out, you say, okay, here's the new stuff. How does that slot into like the decks I have? And maybe we've talked about this before. Maybe you need to tear down and rebuild entirely. But knowing what's out there, like what play styles are struggling, like what, where are the gaps in certain spots? And so then if you see something that can fill that gap, come out with the new stuff, you're like, yep, that's it. That's what I want. Like it gives you almost like a mental head start on what is strong, right? So you once you know what you're missing, you know what you're looking for when the new stuff comes out. And so the more I thought about it like that, the more excited I was. And then I started trying to build my Wurmspat deck, and I got a little discouraged. But it's I've got a couple versions built, and I'm looking forward to trying them out this week against any and all that we can get out. So but based on that, like we had a couple ways we could think about it. We had some thoughts basically, and we'll get into those now, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I'm curious because there's a number of different things with specific factions that can make it easier or harder to handle a rotation. And I'm curious what it is about the Wurmspat that had you discouraged, because I think that might be sort of insightful as to some of the reasons why certain factions would be well positioned or not to handle a rotation.
Sure. I can tell you the most challenging thing for the Wurmspat for me was that their in-faction card support. It felt like, there's no faction out there where like every faction specific card they have is like a grade A winner. But it felt like, I think the Wurmspat, they might only have 3 surges in there, and none of them are particularly strong. And that is a problem at rotation time, because everyone's trying to get those 6 surges. They want those 6 surges to help out. There's just like a relatively low percentage of their in-faction cards, and so they are reaching out for the universal pool more. And then when the universal pool is drastically diminished, and if you are in our particular situation here, it's even more challenging because the universal pool that exists, if you look at just the Dire Chasm cards, anything with hunger in it has like, I don't know if you want to call it the hunger tax, right? Like, so a lot of the hunger cards in there are maybe not that great. I think there's going to be a lot more factions maybe looking at like, can I make something work with hunger? Because there's just not that much out there.
Right.
That might happen. So the biggest challenge I found was despite like decent stats, decent inspired profiles, and some like innately good things on the fighters, it's the card situation that makes it challenging for them. And that's where I ran into trouble. Was like once I got done picking faction specific cards that I thought would help, I was like, "Woof! I have a whole lot more cards to pick up." So yeah, looking at what kind of in faction card support you have is an important thing to look at for if you're evaluating a given faction, whether it's your favorite or one that you've been thinking of trying out. What did you find? And listeners, just guess what faction that Phil was working on.
Yeah. Well, so the first deck that I worked on, because it's the one I've been playing the most and want to keep playing, is the Stalkers. And like you say, the in-faction cards go a long way to helping prop things up. And thankfully, Stalkers have a lot of really strong in-faction cards. Like Astromatrix Alignment or Instinctive Tactics are two extremely easy to score surges, so that's already a nice bonus that they get. But then you have things that start to become problematic, like the Great Plan. And so you go, okay, I need to have duels and hybrids in the deck just to make sure that this is consistent whenever I draw it. And then you look at the universal pool for duels and hybrids right now, and the pickings get pretty slim, especially in the duel department. In the deck that I ended up with, the only universal duels I could find that were not pure aggro style cards were Moment of Glory and Path to Victory. And then they do have one in-faction one that I think is maybe playable, Children of Azir, which is score this if all your surviving friendly fighters are inspired and surviving friendly fighters have 3 or more upgrades. So from what used to be some very easy to score situations to get a duel on a hybrid and then 6 surges, or no, you have 6 or more objectives and 1 or more surges. My mistake there.
Yeah.
But so like you think like, oh, well, even this faction that has these really strong in-faction cards, well, this should make it easy. And then you're like, oh, but there's these other criteria that you still have to fill.
Sure.
And all of a sudden it's really hard. So, having access to good surges, I think it's even more than that too, is like you need to have a game plan that's fairly simple and like is like, we're just going to do this thing. So I was thinking about it, and I think some of the factions that'll do really well post rotation. So all the ghosts, their game plans are always pretty straightforward. I think the Grimwatch will be strong still because they have an in-faction temporary victory. I think like Hrothgorn, or I guess any of the really big burly fighters should still hold up pretty well for aggro play. But
yeah. Well, let's, because there's several criteria that we're looking at here, right? So like specifically we're looking at which factions have good in-faction card support, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And what you're going to do is kind of like balance these criteria against each other. So like you said, Grimwatch, they have some great in-faction support. I think Dread Pageant is another one that like they've got a lot of great objectives, like a lot of playable objectives depending on which way you want to go, and then a lot of like playable gambits, and then upgrades. Maybe it felt a little scanter there, but that's those are strong ones. I think relatively speaking, despite the challenges you have with with the Starblood Stalkers, I think they have a lot of options there. Like they have, because even if you're looking like, man, this deck is much weaker than it used to be, you have to grade that on a curve, right? Because like everybody's taking a hit. So,
yep.
Yeah, I think I think almost like a shorthand way to figure out does your faction have good in-faction support, hits on kind of another one of our key points, which is like, does your faction have a lot of restricted faction cards, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because as Matt pointed out, like the restricted pool like is much smaller now, so there's going to be all kinds of
shockingly small.
yeah, right. There's going to be all kinds of decks out there that are not even running 3 restricted. And what that does is it opens up some some choices that were like, this is a great choice, and I just don't have the room for it. And so if you're one of those factions that have a lot of restricted, so Crushes or Mornflight or Thorns or Grimwatch, like I think those, that's a reason that they would be stronger. And we're going to talk some more. There may be some reasons why they don't surge up as much as you might expect, because there's some push and pull going on here. But that in that criteria, you're not flagging any Direchasim warbands, because none of them have restricted faction cards, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a perfect rule of thumb, but it's I don't know, like if I was a Thorns player, I'd be excited about the fact that like, oh cool, like now what is it, Howling Vortex? Like,
yep.
It's not so hard to get Howling Vortex into my deck now, because there's just that much fewer restricted cards here.
Yeah. Yeah. Lack of competition.
Yeah, exactly. That whole point may like go to the wayside if they drop a Far kind of alongside the new edition, which I don't know, seems unlikely, but it might happen.
I don't think anyone would be disappointed to see it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I think another thing that you kind of mentioned earlier is that like in the Direchasim pool, unlike previous seasons, we have a lot of universal cards that are tied to very specific mechanics. So we have a lot of hunger, we have a lot of primacy, and still a fair number of hunter and quarry restricted checks.
Sure.
Especially a lot of the like kill surges, which I know have really in the last season fallen out of favor just because there's been a lot of other much easier to score surges, but I think we're probably going to see them come back because the surge pool just is that much smaller. And there's a lot that it's like a quarry got a kill, or a hunter got a kill, or you killed a quarry, or like that kind of stuff. And so like if you're one of those warbands that's kind of on the outside looking in on all of those mechanics, you're kind of like Davy was saying, you're pretty much having to just either really like stretch to try and figure out how you're going to include that mechanic in your warband because it's not there initially, or you then have to just know that like you're playing down a good chunk of cards. So when you do have those mechanics, that can be another sign that, you know, you maybe have a leg up at rotation. So I'm thinking the Mad Mob, they could just play a big primacy deck and they can probably be pretty happy with that. And
totally, because like every primacy card is a Direchasim card. Like it did not exist before the season. If you asked me, I would say I thought the mechanic had been around for longer. Like this is embarrassing to say, but I was like a little surprised when I was like, oh right, it wasn't a Beastgrave thing. Like just you get used to playing with a particular thing and you think it's been around for a long time. But yeah, I think they're a prime example of a warband whose relative strength probably went up a little bit, just based on the fact that they can leverage all these primacy cards. Some of them more than others, depending on how primacy gets ruled eventually.
Hopefully,
you know, there's some surges out there and different things that, depending on timing, may be very strong for them.
But for sure.
But what else? Yeah, I interrupted you. What else? What are the warbands you categorize in here?
I think then also you need to give a long thought about where the vampires are going to be sitting post rotation and how powerful they might be when they can just sit around and build up hunger and take advantage of all this hunger scoring cards. Like there are a number of fairly easy to score cards that it's like, well, if you've got hunger, if you removed 3 hunger, or if your fighters have 10 total hunger, and it's like there's a lot of glory just hanging out there for having hunger. And most warbands aren't going to touch that, but they will be all over it. And they might just be like one of the stronger warbands coming out of this. I haven't not finished building a deck for them yet, but I was looking at it, and like their glory pool is pretty large, which is a little surprising.
Their card pool, like essentially, if you consider the hunger pool, generally speaking, to be 90% off limits to most factions, their options are so much wider, right? Their universal pool is maybe 30% larger than anybody else's right now. If you consider hunger cards as being good for them and not others, and I'm just gut instincting that number, but
but I mean, it feels like that's about right. So I think it's gonna be interesting to see what happens there. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just important to keep those things in mind as well. Like, especially if you've been thinking about playing either of those warbands, like this might be the time to try them out because they might be strong.
Sure.
What other things are you looking at in a faction right now that might help sort of lead you towards a strong post rotation deck?
Well, we talked about that far list. I think there's a single surge that everyone's going to expect to be restricted almost immediately. It's a very powerful surge. Right. Yeah. Everything to prove, right? This is a surge that's going to be particularly powerful if you have a innate quarry in your warband, or particularly powerful if you think you're going to give up primacy and just get you going. And so anyone who's got like those small fighters, so like Thorns or Starblood Stalkers or even Despoilers, right? Like they've got the little guys, like that extra surge that you can get your hands on that maybe other people can't, or that other people have to work much harder for, given that, like we've seen some other things rotate out, like Strength of Terror, or, things that, the cards that would make you a quarry. There's still plenty of them. But some of the cards that people would maybe lean on to make themselves a quarry, particularly in an aggro deck, have rotated out. And now you have this extra challenge of both becoming a quarry and gaining primacy. And so everything to prove, if you're a warband that can use everything to prove, you're in a better position than the ones who can't, because that is one of the strongest surges currently available in the universal pool. And it feels weird to say like your faction strength like hinges somewhat upon like how well can you leverage this one card, but I think it's valid.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've basically all found that having a surge pool that is smooth, like that can make your scoring consistent, is probably the most important thing to have. And so having these really easy to score surges really helps to make sure that you always have access to some glory. And this one is about the easiest you can possibly get, because it's just going to kind of happen like one way or another. Shout out to Dread Pageant here again. One of the few factions that has an in-faction quarry, and then also not bad at picking up primacy if you want to go aggro. So
yeah, I mean, it's tough. Like in certain matchups, they're definitely going to get it. Their starting damage output is a little bit on the lower side, so their ability to one shot people is challenging. But it's fair. Like they have an innate quarry, so right off the bat, they just have the possibility of getting it the other way. And so it means anytime they're fighting somebody with a 2-wound fighter, they have three of their folks have the ability to pick it up before any upgrades are even out there. So totally.
Yeah. Anything more about everything to prove, or any other particular objectives that you think are like strong signposts right now for things to be looking towards?
As in like an objective that you could leverage.
So to speak. Things that we're thinking are going to be sort of the drivers, the movers and shakers, things that'll lead you towards the strong decks at the early part of post rotation.
Well, I'll flip that on its head here. Like you're asking, are there any surges that like signify like, hey, if you can use this surge, you're in a strong spot. We'll talk about some surges that left that kind of counterbalances some. So some of the factions that particularly like everything to prove, Thorns or Grimwatch or whatever that could get that by losing their little guys. They also really loved the surges for holding objectives. So we're talking about swift capture and hidden purpose and temporary victory. And 2 of those are restricted. Mm-hmm. But they were a great source of relatively easy glory. And they're going to go like that. Those have been in for a long time. I talked about like feeling like, primacy had been in the game for a long time. These ones have been in the game for a long time. And reaching back to our last episode, I almost regret not having swift capture as being a thing that I would be sad to see go, just because it played into some of these flex decks, and then it created this like constant mini game. Like objective placement was drastically changed when swift capture was in the game. All of a sudden, if you were a hold objective deck, you were trying to place an objective, like all of a sudden, instead of placing all 3 in your own territory, you're like, well, I'll put, if I get to place 3, I'm going to put 2 in my territory, and I'm going to try and place 1 in a spot that I can get to easily. And the other person knows you're doing that, so they're trying to block out the good spots for it or force you to place it in a particularly bad spot. I think that things that swift capture did for objective placement were great for the game, really healthy for the game. And there's not nearly like that. That's going to have a big change. But yeah, so these factions that we've talked about as being strong because of other things, like we've talked about Thorns or Grimwatch or whatever, all of a sudden don't have access to some of these things. And it'd be interesting to see the push and pull. Like sure, they still got everything to prove. That's great. But now they've lost these other really strong options that they used to have, which one of those wins out? Like the help that they get from these or the loss that they feel from losing these other surges. So that'll be interesting dynamic to evaluate.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that actually is something that I was struggling with the Stalkers. I had been playing pretty hard hold objectives. Was running towards the end of the last season, I was actually running temp victory, which I hadn't thought I was going to do because I was doing a whole bunch of just hold 2. But I found that it was just enough like of synergy of what I was already trying to do, because I wanted to hold 3 to inspire anyway. It was like, well, I might as well put it in here because that's what I'm trying to do. And like you lose out all that surge glory, and now it's like, wait, what am I going to do for surges? And like don't have speed package really anymore. There's only one speed related surge left, and that's Winged Death, and it's a much more aggressive card. So it puts you in an interesting spot. We have one surge hold objective card that got left behind, and that is Fleeting Primacy. So it'll be interesting to see if that's strong enough to hang out, because that's hold 3 as a surge for 1, or hold 2 in enemy territory and have the primacy token.
Yeah, I mean, that's effectively reads as hold 3. Right?
Yeah,
like the times you can score on the other side are few and far between. I mean, it helps that it's a hybrid, right?
It does, but like, it's rough. So I think you're definitely onto something with saying that there's going to be an interesting push-pull with hold objectives to start things off here, because your options are limited.
Yeah.
But I think, at least in my assessment, that has kind of been pushing me more and more towards more aggressive strategies. I don't know how you've felt, but it feels like especially the surge pool is really strong, right? Well, not really strong, but is much more geared towards playing an aggro style, whether it's because it's stuff with like getting into enemy territory, or just getting kills. Like there's just a number of things that you can kind of just do naturally if you're already playing aggressively that something like a hold objective deck just doesn't have access to. So, we've got Awesome Predator and Savage Exemplar, and Branching Fate is always going to be around, and that's usually pretty good for aggro. So like just off the top, you can name, a handful of universal surges.
I mean,
so if
Surge of Aggression is real easy to include in your deck now that there's so few restricted available. And that is, did I succeed, like gain primacy, or did I succeed on attack with 4 damage? Like that, there's a lot of options there. And along those lines, there's a ton of kill surges, right? There's
so many.
There is, what is it? Impending Doom, where that's not a kill surge, but I've got 2 next to somebody. There's, like there's all these ones that like, did you kill somebody and did you meet this other condition at the same time? Cool. That's one glory.
Yep.
And so if you're going aggro, there's a lot of different things that'll feed into that.
Yeah, definitely. And then, end phase glory can sometimes be hard to come by, but conveniently right now for aggro, we've got some nice options with things like clean kills. For those who expect their own fighters to die, Pure Carnage is a really strong option, just because it's very consistent glory. Although it means you did have to bleed some glory probably, but doesn't matter if you can still get the win. And so like, I don't know. I just feel like if you have a faction that is aggro with strong in-faction cards, and can take advantage of some of these stronger universals, I think you're going to be in a really nice position post rotation, which makes me think that crushes are going to be coming back with a vengeance here. And maybe aggro vampires too. You can kind of mix and match.
I was going to say vampires are still going to be a huge problem for people. Yeah. Specifically because they're going to be potentially well positioned for aggro, but also for passive hunger builds. So when you roll up for a best of 3, your first game, you're going to be like, well, they have a strong build for aggro. They have a strong build for hunger. And again, this is, early days, the earliest of days, because we don't know what the universals hold, but like, I think those are some predictions that we can see.
Yeah.
We've talked, I wonder if hold objective might see something of a return to some of the end phase scoring, because we're going to lose Mischievous Spirits. I know that was restricted, so it's by and large gone anyway, but Distraction going away.
Yep.
Mischievous Spirits going away. Restless Prize going away. Like there's a lot of things that were potentially damaging to that end phase scoring, which may or may not, and now that they lose some of their surge scoring, maybe some of those end phase scoring become more important for them. So that'll be something to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be more important. I do wonder. It'll depend on how many of the factions with in-faction distractions actually still want to play them.
Sure.
I think a lot of that has fallen by the wayside because there had been so little end phase scoring for hold objectives. But if that comes back, like Lady Heroes is probably pulling in their distraction tech, and you're going to play against it. Much. And then just even looking at my Stalkers build that I did, I was expecting to lose more push tech options than I did, and so confusion is always in, so we can always do that, the little switcheroo, and that can be both a defensive and a offensive move when you're trying to get on or deny objectives. Center of Attention is the same way. You can flexibly use that to either position yourself or pull somebody off. Yep. Symbiote's Call, I think, is going to be a really popular option if it's necessary, because you can use it to push your fighter, or you can flip a token, and like that just can really mess up somebody who's playing hold objectives. and I don't know that we've seen a lot of flipping of tokens as like a direct countermeasure to holding objectives. I feel like a
I mean,
lot of it.
I think it was a great choice. Like it was a awesome choice if you were a dominant position, uncontested player, right?
Yep.
Because it would get you onto stuff and then, or flip something that the opponent was holding. So like it would help you in there. Now the question is like, does it still have enough juice to help out if all you've got is dominant and maybe whatever you've got in faction? But
Yeah, I mean that's definitely true. But I could see somebody bringing Symbiote's Call as like an anti-hold objective tech now. And maybe it's not impactful enough, but like one extra hex is sometimes all you need. I think Living Land will be super popular. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that one go restricted, just because moving a hex can be really strong.
sure.
As we saw with what was it called? It was Move It 2, which is obviously way stronger, but everybody knows what that one is. I can't remember the name right now.
Oh, Restless Prize. Yeah.
Restless Prize. There it is. Yeah. But yeah. So, I mean, it's like the Restless Prize light, but with some other utilities. So I expect to see that kind of fill that gap.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, man, I guess we've been talking about all these gambits. I feel like after going through the pools, gambits and upgrades are actually in a pretty solid spot. I think there's actually a lot of stuff that we still have access to.
I can agree with that. It felt like I had a much harder time figuring out what I was going to put in the objectives than with the gambits and the upgrades.
Yeah. And so I think it's going to be far less important to be able to be like, oh, look, I've got these really strong in-faction gambits, or I've got these really strong in-faction upgrades. Like, yeah, that's always going to be helpful. You'll always take a strong in-faction gambit. But I think everyone's going to have those, and I think the universal pack pretty much guaranteed that like everyone's got a solid 3 or 4 of each that they can just always pull from. Which I think shows
essentials here.
Yeah. Essentials pack. And I think it kind of shows that the essentials pack is working, right? Like, those would be the same sorts of cards that we would expect to be reprints in the starter box. And now they won't need to be because they're just there. So that's pretty cool to see that the design actually worked to fill its function. Do you think there's anything in gambits or upgrades though that would sort of push things in one direction or another to be like, hey, if you've got this, like that could be again a signpost to say that this is going to be a strong option post rotation?
I mean, nothing's jumping out at me is the bottom of it.
Yeah. I was thinking that anybody who's got in-faction bonus wounds or in-faction damage reduction, both of those things feel like they're going to be well positioned to be like, I mean, people are already running those anyway, but I feel like if you think that aggro is going to maybe be on an upswing, that survivability then means you have an advantage there.
That's a fair thought. Yeah. And some of that stuff is more accessible now, like thickened hide or, whatever the -1 damage stuff that typically gets restricted. Those are easier to pick up now.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you see people running that stuff alongside bonus wounds and we start seeing the really big burly fighters again be really hard to deal with. And that might be a nice way to even keep the somewhat seemingly strong aggro options in check. That's a lot of sort of speculation on where things are going, what we've sort of seen in the cards. How about, so I've sort of talked about one of my decks that I built. Is there anything you want to talk about from your Wurmspat deck that you sort of gleaned in that process?
So I took when I was trying to build something, I took that strategy that some people do where you go through. All right, show me everything that's available. All right, now I'm gonna grab everything that looks potentially interesting, make a huge pile of it, and then try to thin it down. And when I did that, I was like, I feel like I've got two directions I could go. I could go aggro or I could go defensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think aggro, I like there's some more instinctive choices there, I guess is what I'm getting at. So the deck I'm going to talk a little bit about is the defensive one here. And it was mostly like it felt like you can lean into the thing that they do strong. And, we didn't really talk about this, but anything that a particular warband does better than anyone else means a thing that you should keep an eye on. So, it might be eyes who can make sure that a fighter, specifically the blue horror, is there for more than one turn in a row. Like they can leverage that. Skaven can get fighters in enemy territory in a particularly strong way because their return mechanic. Wurmspat have the ability to not die, and generally speaking, because of their damage reduction thing. They can mess with aggro, and so with the idea of like aggro being potentially strong is like, all right, let's look into that. Like you could stymie some aggro builds, and then specifically like what passive scores do they have? And there's still some stuff out there. So I saw like Magical Mark. Just all you have to do is have a wizard holding an objective. Well, that's easy. You can have Fecula at the back, standing on something. She's got myriad incantations. There's not a lot of great gambit spells out there, but she could do it, so you find ones that could feed into that. And they have so I kind of leaned into those things that kind of, if you can get enough glory, you can score sitting back. So, and if you're doing that, if you're drawing a lot, then Silver Lining opens up. And so just looking at which ways you can lean in order to be able to like score some of these, like the enough, is there enough passive stuff? And then will your survivability upgrades and your natural survivability carry you through? So that's where I leaned. What I found was that I had some good stuff, and then I just kind of ran some of the passive things. Like I was like, well, you could there's some hunger passive options, but the problem is that it committed so much of your power deck to the hunger thing that you had to go all in. So you couldn't. I didn't feel like you could salt it in. So I had that in there for a while and had to remove it. Even some of these, like if you have myriad incantations, like I was talking about, it's only one glory, and all of a sudden you're like doing a whole lot with your game. It's like, okay, like is 2 enough? Probably not. I want to have 3 so that if I draw it, even if the other person doesn't have a wizard, I want to be able to score it, even if I, so it means I need to have probably at least 3. So I have 1 in my hand at the start and can do that, and if I'm doing this thing with Silver Lining and Myriad, that means I really care about power cards, which means I probably better get Duel of Wits in there so I can draw more cards, et cetera, et cetera. So feeds in. But it was drastic enough that I found that like, I guess I need to take strong start, with the idea that I will have to punch back eventually. So it felt like at first I was like, there's tons of options, but many of those options try to push you in a particular direction, and you run out of runway real fast on your upgrade or on your gambits. Was where I felt the most pressure. Once I, we talked about there being a lot of gambits out there, but if you're trying to go defensive, you have to kind of commit to a few different options. So that's where I ended up.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. That like, it's not always just like, are there available surges? Are there available end phase cards? But then also like, once I start to build this together, how do I make it cohesive? And I think that's also something I was seeing with trying to build for, the great plan. And it's like, you start to make certain decisions and it leads you down a path. And I feel like towards the end of last season, a lot of the times you'd start to just sort of put stuff together and you'd be like, okay, yeah, this is all coming together. And then it just kind of works and it all kind of slots together, and kind of grinding the gears here a little bit. As soon as you try and think there's something there, it's like, oh, but then I've got to, oh no, I've got to take this other stuff out because it's like working against that strategy, or it's not working towards it, I guess. So I think that'll also be an interesting thing to see, like which warbands can have not just like good individual cards, but good cards that all work together in a synergistic way to allow for that smooth, consistent game.
Yeah.
That I haven't looked enough at to even have an answer as to who's going to be able to be in that position.
Right.
But I think that'll be an interesting space to watch.
Yeah. And it'll be, some of this also depends on how they roll things out, right? Like, traditionally
definitely.
we've seen the core set drop, and then pretty quickly after, the first one or two warbands arrive. So, the universal pool can sometimes grow pretty quickly right out of the gate, but yeah.
So that pretty much, I think, is everything that we had wanted to say. Is there any other topics that you thought were worth calling out for trying to build a deck post-rotation?
Only that, like I said, I kind of found a lot of in this defensive build, and we'll have the links for both these decks in our show notes. In this defensive build, I'd include something, and it was kind of like a fresh, instead of having the things where I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to keep reaching for this because I know this is strong. I've used it a lot of times. All of a sudden it was right from the start. So I get to the end, and I can even say with the one I currently have, I got to the end and I'm like, yep, I've got Promise of Destruction, which is there are one or more persistent gambits, and started out strong on that. And then looking at it now, I'm like, man, I trimmed a whole bunch of those out, and now I basically have I've only got one to score it off of. So that's got to change, right? So it was it's an iterative process to do, and substantially harder because all your sort of shortcuts are gone again, like the stuff that you were used to doing just on impulse, or not impulse, on instinct, out of habit, muscle memory, building your deck. Those you have to kind of relearn it almost, and get back, and that's good. Like that's a fun way to do it. So, it's not something I do enough. Like I will freely admit I do probably more deck poaching than I do deck building, and then tweak. I'll take somebody else's deck and then tweak it. But this is a good exercise for me to do to get ready for the new season, because everything's gonna be new for everybody.
Yeah. For those of you who do like building decks, this is the time. Like, go wild, try new stuff, experiment, do things that maybe aren't going to be good, because you probably won't know unless you try it. And I think what you're saying, I feel that too. Like, there were times where it's like the first 8 objectives in my deck, it was almost like automatic. I'd just be like, well, these ones, and then this, that, and that, because they're my faction. And then like one more surge that I know is super easy. And it's like, well, most of my deck's already built, and it was just on autopilot. Like, I'm not even really thinking about it. So that's definitely exciting. I always love that part of rotation, getting to like dig in and be like, what is here? What are the new things that we could do that we haven't been doing or have never done? And maybe someone will like find that like weird off brand hunger build that doesn't use vampires and makes that work, and that would be really cool. It'd be really fun. So
might be out there.
Yeah. All right. Well, as always, if you would like to get in touch with us to talk about anything we've said on this episode, if you've got decks that you're super excited about or other ideas for post rotation or just anything about the game in general and would like to get in touch with us, you can reach us at WGHcast on Twitter or whatthehexcast@gmail.com. And like we were saying with Ulu earlier, if you would like to hear any more about the stories of the Mortal Realms or any of our other content, you can run over to themortalrealms.com. Check out all our other shows. If you'd like to, become a supporter of the overall channel, you can feel free to jump on our Patreon. Otherwise, we'd just love to hear from you. Just any sort of feedback that you've got for us, it's always appreciated. Coming up next, we are really hoping that we will have enough Harrowdeep info that we could have our next episode be about Harrowdeep and the new factions and new mechanics and all the stuff that everyone really wants to see. Because those initial images look juicy. I am super excited about it. So hopefully that'll be what's up next. If they just keep teasing us for weeks on end and we don't see any substantial information, we will come up with something. Do not worry.
Sure.
But yeah. Any recommended listening for folks today, Davey?
Sure. This is a track I'm only familiar with off of the soundtrack from the movie Singles. It's Waiting for Somebody by Paul Westerberg.
Fitting. Well, for What the Hex, I've been Phil.
And I've been Davy. I'm doing great. Other than the fact that I just had a light blink out over here. I gotta figure out. It might have been a bulb. Real interesting stuff, but it's
as long as you don't lose your internet while we're recording.
That's all that matters. I'm assessing. I think everything else plugged into that is still going. So carry on.
Good. Yeah. Good deal.
Disaster averted.
Whew.
Real exciting stuff, listeners. Stick with us.
That one.
For this thrill ride. Just pause here. I got an alarm going off on my phone. Real professional here. I don't know if you can hear that. All right, I'm back. Cool. Yeah, and that is definitely the bulb went. It's a cool like bulb. My spouse got me for kind of like having a whatever extra like it's a I don't know, like a toned bulb or whatever for lighting the painting area.
Sure.
But apparently it has a very powerful incandescent element in it because it is burned out, and the room down here smells like burning. But
oh my,
I'm looking. It's only that bulb that went on us. So yeah. At first I was like, is my house on fire? No, it's just this one bulb. Anywho.
Cool.
That's more for after the credits, I guess.